Hello, hello. Happy Thursday and welcome back to Good Grief, Life After Loss. I'm so glad you are here today for this episode and quite frankly, every episode. So thank you to all my listeners. Just thank you for the support. I really appreciate it. It's meant a lot to be able to see the number of downloads continuing to stay steady and increase some weeks. So I really appreciate those of you who are coming back week after week and listening to me talk to you for 15 minutes each week. So thank you. So for today's episode, I want to talk about something that I feel like probably all of you have experienced in some capacity. And it's something that sometimes I don't feel very aware of. I don't notice it. And other times it feels so prevalent and so just active in my life in the conversations I'm having. And that is the assumptions that people make about grievers. And in my case, specifically young grievers, I feel like those assumptions are just 10 times worse or 10 times stronger. So I want to talk you through what those assumptions are, why I feel like they are harmful, and why I also just feel like they are completely wrong and inaccurate. So let's dive into it. Okay, so there are a lot of assumptions people tend to make about young grievers. The first one is the one that I think probably bothers me the most, and that is the fragile assumption. I feel like people often assume that because I've gone through something so painful and at such a young age, losing my brother when I was just 14, they assume that I must just be this fragile little thing who could break at any moment. Like I'm literally just walking around life on the verge of breaking, and any difficult or painful moment or conversation could push me over the edge. It could just take one thing for me to completely crack. And that's so annoying because the reality is, yes, grief has seriously changed me. And obviously, there are still hard days. There will always be hard days. But going through loss doesn't mean I'm just suddenly made of glass. If anything, and that's why this makes me so annoyed, is that if anything, grief has made me so much stronger and more resilient. I've learned how to carry pain and still keep moving forward. And honestly, I feel like losing someone, especially at a young age, gives you a sense of resilience that other people may never have in their life, because I believe resilience is a skill and something you can acquire and learn and develop. And losing someone at a young age forces you to become resilient. And that's why it's just so frustrating that people assume I'm so fragile when I'm like, no, I am resilient. You, on the other hand, have never had to go through hell and come out on the other side and survive. Like, I am the strong one. I don't know. Man, that's frustrating. And this assumption can honestly feel really isolating because I feel like as a result of people assuming I'm fragile, they avoid telling me bad news or they intentionally shield me from stressful situations because they think they're protecting me. But I do not need to be protected. I need to be treated like a full, capable person, not like a fragile little thing that's gonna break at the first mention of bad news. And I just feel like I cannot be alone in that, and I can think of so many situations where this has happened, and it's just so frustrating because it's like, it's what the old saying goes, assuming makes an ass out of you and me, and that's exactly what it feels like when someone makes the assumption that I am fragile and can't handle bad or upsetting news as a result of losing Sam. Anyways, if you are someone listening who has been guilty of making these assumptions about a person in your life, whether it's because they're a young griever who's experienced loss or for some other reason, just don't. I think it's easy to make assumptions, to assume that you're a mind reader, that you know how someone else is going to react to something, how they're going to feel about something. But in reality, that is not the case. None of us are mind readers, and it's better to just put it all out there honestly, provide support for the person who you're assuming to be fragile, but don't protect them and leave them out of conversations because you think they're not capable of having them. Okay, I think I've said my piece with that one. The second assumption is another really frustrating one that I have also unfortunately experienced a lot, which is the assumption that people feel like they can't share their pain with me because their pain will never compare with mine. And I've definitely noticed in the moment when people are hesitating to share their own struggles with me. It's like they think, how can I complain about my bad day or my breakup or whatever it is when she lost her brother? Like, how could I ever burden her with my trauma that's not nearly as bad as hers? And while I understand where that instinct comes from, like I truly do, it just creates distance. It feels lonely for both you and me, but it really feels lonely when people hold back because they think my grief somehow overshadows their pain. And honestly, what frustrates me about that the most is I've never in a situation, potentially maybe I've thought it, but I have never verbalized in a situation when someone is complaining to me or telling me about their bad day or their bad situation. I have never once said like, hey, well, at least your brother's alive. Like, no, I've never said that. And very rarely do I ever think that, but I have never said that. And so it's frustrating that people make these assumptions when in my mind, I have done nothing to make them feel that way. The truth is, pain is not a competition. Loss, stress, sadness, hurt, they all exist on their own terms. And just because mine looks a certain way doesn't mean yours isn't real or important or just as valid. Sometimes I have to remind the people around me that I want to hear about their lives, the good, the bad. I want to connect with them and cry with them and feel their pain, not be another thing for them to worry about and feel like they can't go to me. And also, something that I do think is important to talk about here is the grief of losing a person is a very certain type of grief, and there are so many other types of grief. I think in my case, losing Sam, obviously, the worst possible thing that could ever happen. However, when you lose someone, you go through the 5 stages, if you believe that, each their own, but you go through the 5 stages, and then eventually you reach acceptance, and you almost find a peace with the reality of that situation. And where I think that differs from grief in day-to-day life, where it's not grief from death, but maybe grieving the loss of a relationship or the loss of your dream job or whatever it is, like those types of grief are ones that show up every single day. And unfortunately, you don't always get to that point of resolution, of peace, of acceptance. And so in some ways, that type of grief can be so much more haunting. Like, I wouldn't want a friend to ever not want to complain to me about how much their breakup hurts because, like, well, Skylar lost her brother, so how can I complain? Like, yes, but I had peace and closure. Breakups, like, you don't always get that peace or closure, that acceptance. It's just like that person is still out there living in the world, and you just have to live with that. So that was a very long-winded way to say that please don't assume that because I lost my brother, my pain is always so much worse than yours and yours can never compare to yours, because I don't think that's the truth. Everyone's pain is different and means different things to each person. Anywho, moving on. The third thing is the assumption that people think you must have it all figured out. Because I talk openly about grief on this podcast, on social media, with Live Like Sam in day-to-day conversations, people sometimes just assume that if I'm comfortable enough to have those conversations, I must have fully healed, or even that I'll always know the right thing to say to someone who's grieving, which, by the way, is so not true. Honestly, feels kind of weird to have this podcast and preach like what not to say, what to say, when I don't even know what to say in some situations. But the truth is here that grief doesn't have a finish line. Like, it's not something you can accomplish and check off the list. I still have moments where it hits me out of nowhere, where I just feel completely lost. And just because I'm willing to openly talk about it does not mean I have solved the puzzle of grief in life. And there's definitely also pressure that comes with being so open about something so personal. Like, I've had so many situations where people look to me for advice or comfort, or assume that almost like I'm the spokesperson for all young grievers and I'll know exactly what to say, and they can come to me and ask me, how should I talk to my friend who just lost someone? And again, I still don't know. I don't know. And I really value that people see me as that person. They feel they can come to me to seek advice or to seek comfort, but I'm still figuring things out too. So it's a balance of helping others while still taking care of my own healing process. But I think one thing is definitely for sure, that I do not have it all figured out. That's for sure. Okay, so the fourth and final assumption I want to talk about today is the assumption that you are defined by your loss. And this one's tricky because I know losing Sam will always be such a huge part of my story. And now I'm doing this podcast and I have lived like Sam and all of those things, which only make it a bigger and bigger and bigger part of my story. But it honestly sometimes feels like people only see me through that lens, like I'm just the girl who lost her brother, as if that's my entire identity. And that obviously feels very limiting because grief is part of me, but I'm also someone who loves traveling and working on creative projects and spending time with friends and family and being outside and whatever it is. Like, there's so much more to my life than just my loss. Though I will admit that I feel like I'm guilty of making this assumption about myself. Honestly, like, I've had times where, like I said in one of my past episodes, like, who am I if not the girl whose brother died, if not the co-founder of Live Like Sam, if not this young griever, whatever it is. Like, it is kind of hard to separate my identities and see the value in myself as a person completely separate from my grief and my loss. And I think that's probably a big struggle for anyone who has gone through loss. I think if you're a young person and you're still developing your own identity, to have such a large chunk of your identity already be decided for you now that you're a griever, that you've lost someone, like, that feels very hard. How do you create the rest of your identity separate from that? But I'd also imagine that if you're older and you lose a husband or wife and you become a widow, like, that also probably feels like a huge part of your identity now. That's like a way you have to identify yourself in future conversations. So I think it's impossible for us to not feel defined by our loss, but I think other people making those assumptions are bad enough, so at least it's important for us to do our best to not make those assumptions about ourselves and to see us as an entire human being, and grief is just a very small part of it, but we have so much more to offer and there's so much more to us. So those are the 4 assumptions that I immediately came to mind, at least when I sat down to record this episode. I'm sure there are many more, but those are 4 that honestly are very real for me and feel very present in my life. And if I could get one message across to you guys, to my listeners, and maybe more importantly to the people in my life who have potentially made these assumptions about me, it is this: you do not have to walk on eggshells around me, and I am not as fragile as you might think. I am actually so much stronger than you probably give me credit for, as I think many grievers are. You also don't have to hide your struggles and your bad days because they are still valid. You don't have to minimize them just because I've gone through something hard. I certainly do not have all the answers. I am not the grief expert, although I would love to put grief guru on a business card one day. I am not that. I am still figuring it out alongside you. And even if this podcast feels like I'm preaching to the choir, I don't have it all figured out. I do not know all things grief. And finally, and most importantly, I am more than my grief. And so are you. I'm still growing. I'm still changing. I am still living a full life, and I have so much more of it left to live, as do all of you. So I think those are all things that are really important. I wish everyone knew that, and hopefully after listening to this, you guys can walk away knowing about these assumptions and hopefully be a little more cognizant of when you're making these assumptions and start working on shifting your mindset and veering away from these assumptions about the grievers in your life. Anyways, I hope you found this episode useful. If not useful, at least relatable. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Please share this episode with a friend, leave a comment, leave a 5-star rating. That would mean so much to me. And just thank you for your support, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. We'll talk soon. Bye.